Once upon a time, in a quiet market town far from the great roads, there lived a woman named Anara. To the villagers, she was simply known as the soup seller. Every morning before the rooster's crow had fully broken the night, she would light her fire, stir her blackened pot, and by sunrise, the fragrance of her soup drifted through the air like a spell. No one ever questioned her ingredients. No one dared. They only knew that her soup was unlike any other, thick, rich and delicious, with a taste that lingered long after the bowl was empty. Farmers licked their fingers clean, traders carried calabashes filled with it to the fields. Even the village elders, who prided themselves on being strict and cautious, would line up at her stall. But Anara was not like the other women of the village. She lived alone in a crooked hut at the edge of town. No husband, no children. Her family, people whispered, had all vanished one after the other, leaving her behind like a shadow that refused to fade. Yet, she never mourned, never cried. Instead, she stirred her pot, smiling quietly as she watched people slurp her soup. At first, the villagers only praised her. They called her food heaven in a bowl. But soon, whispers began to creep like smoke. Some said her stall never ran out of meat, even when other sellers struggled. Some claimed that when the moon was full, they saw her walking into the forest with nothing in her hands, only to return with her calabash full of steaming broth. And then, there was Mina, the gossip of the market, who swore she once saw a pale hand floating in Anara's pot before it sank beneath the bubbling surface. The people laughed at Mina. They called her a liar. Yet, deep inside, a seed of fear had been planted. Still, they ate. Hunger silenced suspicion, and Anara's stall never lacked customers. But one day, something happened that the village would never forget. It began with a child. A young boy named Tinde, the son of a farmer, loved Anara's soup more than anything else. He would beg his mother for coins, and when she refused, he would run errands for neighbors just to afford one bowl. But one morning, as he gulped the thick broth, something strange touched his tongue. He pulled it out, thinking it was a bone. It was not a bone. The boy screamed, his small hand holding up what looked like the tip of a finger, pale with a broken nail. The market froze, bowls dropped, the chatter stopped. All eyes turned to Anara's pot. But Anara did not panic. She leaned over, plucked the finger from the boy's hand, and laughed softly. "Just goat knuckle," she said, her voice calm as a still river. "You village people fear everything. Eat your soup, little one." She tossed the piece back into the bubbling broth and continued stirring. The boy's mother smacked his head, embarrassed, and forced him to finish his food. The crowd laughed nervously and returned to their bowls, but not everyone was convinced. An elder at the far end of the stall narrowed his eyes as he chewed. The taste was too rich, too strange. He had eaten goat knuckle all his life, but never had it looked or tasted like this. Still, he said nothing, for hunger often makes men blind to truth. That night, however, whispers filled the village. Some swore the finger was real, others said it was just a child's foolishness. But beneath their laughter, unease was growing, and then, people began to vanish. The first to vanish was a traveler, a stranger with no family to ask after him. He had passed through the market at dusk, bought a gourd of Anara's soup, and was never seen again. People shrugged. Travelers disappear like smoke. But then, a widow from the weaving quarter failed to return from fetching water. A month later, a quiet carpenter who often ate at Anara's stall did not open his workshop. His door stood ajar, tools neatly arranged, bed carefully made. No struggle, no note, no goodbye. Each time someone disappeared, Anara's pot seemed richer, darker, more fragrant, as if sorrow itself had melted into oil and spice. Minna, hungry for attention, pointed her finger toward the crooked hut at the edge of town. "I told you," she cried. "Did I not say I saw a hand in her pot?" The villagers hissed at her to be silent. No one wanted to believe the thing their mouths loved could be the thing their hearts feared. Yet unease found a voice in the chief hunter, Ode. He was a man of few words, a tracker who could read sand as if it were a letter. He did not eat at Anara's stall. He did not speak of her either. But on the morning after the carpenter vanished, Ode knelt by the market path, pressed 2 fingers into the dust, and followed a faint groove like a heavy calabash dragged by a thin rope, leading from the market to the edge of the forest, then curving back toward Anara's hut. He stood there for a long time, eyes on the door. Inside, a wooden spoon clinked against iron. A smell so sweet, it pricked tears from his eyes drifted out and tried to pull him closer. He stepped back. Meanwhile, the elders called a meeting. They asked Anara to bring her pot and demonstrate her cooking in the square where everyone could watch. She agreed at once and smiled, which frightened them more than any refusal. On the appointed day, she arrived with her black pot, her firewood, her basket of herbs. People watched closely, too closely, as she laid out garlic, peppers, onions, bunches of bitter leaves, small gourds of palm oil, and tied bundles of something wrapped in plantain fiber. "What meat do you use?" an elder asked. "Goat," Anara said, her voice light. "Goat from a trader beyond the hills." "Where is the goat today?" another asked. "Already butchered," she answered. "Meat does not walk to market by itself." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Relief loosened shoulders, suspicion folded itself and tucked away for a moment. She cooked with the calm of someone plucking threads from the air. Smoke rose, herbs sank, oil flashed, and the pot began to sing. By noon, the broth was thick and velvet soft. She served the elders first, then the townsfolk. They ate, they closed their eyes, they nodded. Yes, this was the soup they knew. The fear that had coiled in their bellies slackened and fell asleep. But Odie did not sit. He drifted behind the stall, peering at what others overlooked. The empty plantain wraps, slender finger-length, knotted at one end, and the knife she used, short and sharp, its handle wrapped in faded red cloth. He noticed the ash pit beside her table. Buried near the rim was a small ring of metal, blackened by fire, the shape barely visible, a simple band hammered by a village carpenter. Odie's mouth hardened. The missing carpenter made rings for brides who had little money and much hope. The design was his. That night, the hunter went to the shrine. The priest listened, silent, then poured libation on the earth. "People do not vanish without a mouth that swallows them," the priest said. "But a mouth can be a road, and a road can wear the face of kindness." He gave Odie a charm of bitter bark and salt. "Tie this at your waist. When the pot lies, the salt will sweat." Odie waited for moonless dark and walked the path to Anara's hut. He did not knock. He stood among the raffia shadows and listened. Inside, something thudded softly, like knuckles tapping wood. A second sound followed, a wet fold, a ladle scraping the rim, a whisper that might have been a prayer or might have been a recipe. The charm at his waist grew damp. The salt began to cry. He circled to the back window. There, through a torn mat of woven reeds, he saw the black pot on a low fire and Anara kneeling beside it, lips moving, eyes bright with reflected flame. She unwrapped a plantain bundle with careful fingers and dropped its contents into the broth. It was small, pale, it sank quickly. Odie's breath stopped in his chest. He stepped closer and the floor groaned. Anara's head snapped toward the window. For a heartbeat, Hunter and Cook stared at each other through the gap. Her smile was soft, almost tender. "Are you hungry?" she asked, and her voice carried as if the hut itself spoke. Odie did not answer. He backed into the night as the charm at his waist burned cold. By dawn, a rumor had already grown legs. Someone had seen the hunter near Anara's hut. People gathered, whispering, waiting for Odie to speak. But when he came to the square, he did not accuse her. He set the blackened metal band on the ground. "I found this in her ash," he said. The bride whose ring it was came forward, shaking. "We had it made last month," she whispered. "My husband, he is missing." The market exploded into noise. Some screamed, others shouted to seize Anara at once. But Anara had already walked into the square, calm as dawn, ladle in hand. "All this shouting," she said lightly, "and for what? A ring can fall into a fire. A hunter can lose his way in the dark. Open your hut," the chief elder ordered, voice shaking. "We will search it." Anara tilted her head, eyes shining as if the very idea amused her. "If you wish," she replied, "but let us begin with the pot. Let us end all doubts." She lifted the lid. Steam rolled out, heavy and perfumed. People leaned forward against their fear, pulled by the same spell that had fooled them for months. For a breathless moment, there was nothing, only broth, only spice, only hunger. Then something rose slowly from the depths, as if a memory had learned to float. It bobbed once. A small white hand surfaced, palm up, as if asking the market for silence. The square stopped breathing. The ladle slipped from Anara's fingers and clanged against the rim. Somewhere, far away, a goat bleated and fell quiet. Ode reached for the charm at his waist. It was dripping, and before anyone could scream, a voice from the back shouted, "That is my husband's scar!" The woman who shouted pushed through the crowd, her wrapper half loose, her eyes wild with grief. She pointed at the pale hand floating in the soup. "That scar on the thumb. My husband cut it with his own blade last season." Her voice broke into sobs. "You fed him to us." A scream tore through the square as bowls clattered to the earth. Men spat violently, gagging on what they had eaten. Women dropped to their knees, clutching their stomachs, as if the soup itself had turned to poison inside them. Children wailed, yet Anara did not flinch. Her face was calm, her eyes as dark as the pot itself. The chief elder staggered forward, his voice trembling. "Seize her!" The hunters rushed, but Anara did not run. She lifted her chin, as though daring them. When they dragged her toward her hut, she smiled faintly, whispering words too low for anyone to catch. Her neighbors, trembling but determined, stormed inside the crooked hut. The air was heavy, thick with spice, and something fouler, like old blood clinging to clay. They found baskets covered in leaves. Inside each one lay bones, bleached, cracked, some still wrapped with strips of flesh. Behind her cooking mat, jars of broth lined the wall, each sealed with palm wax, each containing something pale floating beneath the oil, a finger here, a wrist there. Some villagers fled, retching into the dust, and at the back of the hut, in a pit dug shallow and covered with raffia, Odie found what silenced even the loudest mouths: half-buried bodies, hacked crudely into pieces, their arms missing from the shoulder down. He counted 3, then 4, then 5. The pit seemed endless. The people wailed. The chief priest, who had followed in silence, raised his staff and cried, "Abomination!" His voice cracked like thunder. "She has broken the earth with her evil. She has fattened her belly with the blood of her kin. She has cursed this land with her pot." Dragged back into the square, Anara's smile had not left her lips. She looked at the terrified faces around her, and said softly, "You begged for my soup. You licked your fingers. You came with coins every morning, did you not? You asked no questions. You wanted only the taste, and now you spit it out. Fools, you fed your hunger, and I fed mine." The people screamed for fire. They screamed for death, but the chief priest raised his hand. "Wait. Before judgment, the truth must be weighed." He turned to Anara. "Why human flesh? Who taught you this abomination?" For the first time, Anara's smile faltered. A shadow passed over her eyes, and her lips trembled, as though something long buried threatened to surface. "It was not I who began it," she whispered. "It was my mother." The crowd gasped. Mothers pulled their children close, and then Anara began to tell her tale. The market grew silent as Anara's voice slid into the air, low and heavy. "My mother was a cook for the royal court in another land," she began. "The king demanded flavors no goat or cow could provide. He hungered for meat that carried fear in its fibers, meat that trembled before the knife. One night, his guards brought a thief to the kitchens. Instead of hanging him, the king ordered my mother to stew him. She obeyed, and when the king tasted, he smiled for the first time in years." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Anara's eyes glistened with memory. From then on, prisoners, beggars, and slaves vanished into her pot. She whispered her recipes to me when I was a girl: where to cut, how to season, how to stir until flesh forgets its name. When she died, I carried the pot, I carried the hunger, and here I am. The villagers recoiled. Mothers hid their children behind their wrappers. Some spat 3 times on the ground, warding off her curse. But Anara did not bow her head. She stood tall, chains clinking around her wrists, eyes burning like coals. "You call it abomination," she said, "but your lips craved it. You praised me. You came every morning. You are no different from me. You only lacked the courage to know what you swallowed." The elders turned to the chief priest, begging for judgment. His face was grave as stone. "This land will know no peace until her evil is purged," he declared. "By fire she must end, and by fire her curse shall scatter." That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they tied Anara to a stake in the square. Her black pot was smashed, her hut torn down. The hunters poured oil over the wood piled at her feet. The villagers chanted prayers, their voices trembling. Anara, bound and waiting for the flame, laughed softly, a laugh that sent chills through every spine. "You think fire will silence me," she hissed. "I am already in you. In your bellies, in your bones. Each of you has tasted me. When you dream, it will be my broth you smell. When you hunger, it will be my hands you crave." Her words turned to shrieks as the fire caught. Flames licked her skin, smoke curled to the heavens, and her laughter rose one last time before it was swallowed by crackling wood. The people covered their ears, but the sound lodged deep in their hearts like a curse. By dawn, nothing remained of Anara but ash scattered on the wind. The chief priest gathered the village and decreed, "From this day no pot shall boil in the square without witnesses, no cook shall prepare food unseen, and every market shall remember the tale of the soup seller who fed human hands to her own people." Generations passed, yet the story never died. Children grew up hearing it by firelight, shivering as their elders whispered, "Beware the soup too rich, the flavor too sweet." For in every village pot, Anara's shadow still stirs, and so the town carried its scar forever, a memory of the woman who sold soup with human hands inside, and how nobody noticed, until it was too late.